Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Katie Music Peary, and it's my privilege to welcome you and begin this evening's program. Thank you for being here as we honor and pay tribute to Dianne Powell, a beloved friend of the UTA libraries and a generous supporter of our special collections. Dianne's impact on our work and our collections is profound. Her commitment to preserving history and supporting scholarship helps shape the resources we rely on today. The generosity of patrons like Dianne ensures that our libraries remain vibrant centers of learning and discovery. While we could speak at length about her contributions, there is no one better to reflect on Dianne's legacy than her son. Please join me in welcoming Holt Vaughn, who will share a few words in her honor.
Thank you. It's good to be here. I recognize a lot of faces through the years. I remember coming here with, we called my grandparents, Virginia and Jenkins, Geechee and Granddaddy. And so I lived in San Antonio, and all growing up, we would come here in the summers, my sister and I, and we would stay at, it was basically called Camp Gigi's house. And she would entertain us and take us to Six Flags, and we had all these amazing memories. But I do recall coming to this library pretty often to try to learn about what she was doing, and Granddaddy was contributing to, and so there's a lot of family history here. But I guess just on behalf of my family, really thank you for honoring my mom, Dianne Powell, but her maiden name is Garrett, of course. And I'm here with my two sons, Tyson and Brooks. I have one other son. He couldn't make it. He's playing tennis somewhere. But guys, can you stand up, please? This is Dianne's grandkids, and this is their first time at the library. Yes. So, yeah, pretty much any library. We have to bribe them with some in and out after this so they can, Then, of course, Dianne's brother, my Uncle Jinx, and his daughter Sarah are here. Together we sort of represent an extended family across the country with Dianne's family and my grandparents. We all wanted to be here, but life gets busy, but we just couldn't be more honored that you all are here on my mom's behalf. Much will be said about her contributions, but I think about her leadership, her generosity, the way she carried forward a remarkable legacy for her parents and for our family. But rather than repeat those details, I'd like to share sort of what it means to us as her family, for everyone to be here, and what this tribute means. My mom lived with a spirit of kindness, generosity, and curiosity, if you knew her. She didn't see maps as collections, as possessions to be stored away, but really as gifts to be shared. She was always excited when people came over and she could showcase some of, the maps that she had. She sort of looked at them as like windows into stories of history. And that same spirit really shaped the way that she treated people. She's always encouraging. If you knew her, she's always connecting, always up. Hello? Okay. But for me, it really is. Personally, it's especially meaningful to have my boys here tonight. I know I've introduced them, but this is their first time visiting the library and seeing what their grandmother really helped build. And for my son Brooks, whose middle name is Garrett, tonight gives him a deeper sense of where that name comes from. From his grandparents, Virginia and Jenkins Garrett. For both my boys, I just hope that this visit, shows that the choices we make to serve, to share, to give can ripple outward in ways that can last far beyond us. So on behalf of our family, thank you to the UTA libraries, to the special collections, and to all of you for remembering my mom, not just for what she did, but for how she did it, with warmth and grace and genuine desire to leave things better than she found them. So we're very, very grateful. So thank you.
And now some remarks from our Dean of Libraries, John Wong.
Thank you, Katie. Good evening, everyone. It is my great pleasure to welcome the Texas Map Society back to UTA Libraries. Today, we gather with our friends, family, and colleagues to remember and celebrate Dianne Powell. Her passion, her generosity, and the enduring Garrett family legacy that continue to enrich us all. We're especially honored to have members of Dianne's family with us tonight. Thank you to be here. As someone relatively new to UTA Libraries, I did not have the privilege of knowing Dianne personally, yet I see her impact every day. Her dedication and support have empowered our libraries to grow in strength, shaping our special collection into what we are today. Stronger, more vibrant, and more impactful. I consider myself among the many who benefit from her legacy, her vision, and I'm honored to serve as one of the stewards entrusted with carrying forward her legacy. I've come to know Dianne through stories shared by my colleagues, stories that speak volumes about her character and her commitment. One of our friends here tonight, retired cartographic archivist Ben Huseman, he's right there, described Dianne as a wonderful friend and supporter of UTA Library's special collections, someone who energetically and faithfully continued the pattern of her father and mother set for involvement in philanthropic endeavors. Her called her a marvelous leader and organizer, and I think that beautifully captures the spirit we are honoring this evening. Our map collections will not hold the national and international distinction they do without the generosity of Dianne and the Garrett family. Through their gift and their vision, we have cultivated a collection that not only preserves history, but also draws scholars, faculty, researchers, and enthusiasts from across the globe. It is a living collection, one that sparks conversations, fosters collaborations, and inspires the creation of new knowledge. But the Garrett family legacy extends beyond the materials themselves. It is about community. Many of you here today have been moved by their example, becoming donors, advocates, and friends of the libraries. Together, we help sustain and grow the collection and help carry forward the values of generosity, curiosity, and the discovery that Garrett family so beautifully embodies. I believe that Dianne and her parents would be smiling today, knowing that those maps are still studied, still cherished, and still sparking new conversations. Their legacy ensures that generations to come will have the same opportunity to learn, to explore, and to build meaningful connections. At UTA Libraries, we're proud to carry forward the Garrett's extraordinary story and yours. With that, I wish you a meaningful panel discussion and a successful conference tomorrow. Thank you for being here to celebrate Dianne Powell and to carry forward her spirit and her legacy.
It is now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Emery Demhardt, our MC for this evening's panel. As UTA's Jenkins and Virginia Garrett Chair in the History of Cartography and Greater Southwestern Studies, Emory has been instrumental in advancing the exploration and scholarship of these renowned collections, continuing the Garrett legacy for generations to come.
So, thank you. And given the color of my hair, you see, I rather prefer that I am the moderator of the panel, not the MC. So these are not Video Music Awards or the Emmys. We are talking about old maps. You don't need to be an old guy to be into maps, but I prefer moderator. So let's see whether the technology is working. Okay, so tonight, the evening is a tribute to the cartographic life of Dianne Garrett Powell. We want to celebrate her as a collector, as a networker, and as a patroness to whom the University of Texas at Arlington is deeply in debt for the many contributions over the years. And to make this happen, we have assembled an all-star team, okay? Now I get also a little bit more to the modern times. So we have 4 panelists, and it's my distinct honor to introduce the panelists. The first one is Wesley Brown. He is sitting over there. He is a resident of Denver and a proud Coloradan. He definitively doesn't like it when I tell him that he, in fact, is an estranged North Texan. There was something like the Compromise of 1850, and before that, you would be a Texan. Okay, but I leave you the statehood of Colorado. He's a former banker and not a former outdoor person. I'm pretty sure that he is still in outdoor, and he is not because of his professional life or what he does in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains, but for collecting. He's in collecting for more than 50 years, and the focus is on exploration and the settlement of the American West since the 16th century. I don't know how far or close I need to get to the microphone. Okay, fine. He collects everything, and the emphasis is on everything and on each letter in everything, what has any connection to the cartography of what later became Colorado. I don't think that there's anything what is not in your collection by now. You see, this is a great thing about dealing with maps. You never reach the end of it. And he also collects Mappa Mundis. These are maps of the world and East Asia and much more. He is also the co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Map Society. So this is the equivalent of the Texas Map Society, the meeting we are having here tomorrow. And he co-founded it together with Donald McGurk. He is sitting over there, and I will introduce him a little bit later. So you see, there are interrelations between in the map community. He is also active in the Society for the History of Discoveries, and you see then the acronym IMCOS. The initiated, of course, know it, but for the few who are not familiar with IMCOS, International Map Collector Society. So he's also active on an international level. Then he is a former co-chairman of the Philip Lee Phillips Society. While we have the panel discussion, he will have a chance to explain a little bit more about this because Dianne was active on this society as well. Independent scholar, collector, author of articles, and I just have here one revealing the mysterious West. So there is much more, but importantly for us, and this is true to all the 4 panelists, what we have here, map donations have gone, amongst other places, to, in his case, to the Denver Public Library, and of course, I say so, of course, the University of Texas at Arlington Special Collections. And even an old dog can learn new tricks. So what I learned from Wes is when you introduce people, you should also bring something unexpected. He calls it the fun fact. So a fun fact I can share with you that he has not only climbed all the mountains in Colorado taller than 10,000 feet. Oh, okay, but he's okay. And as we all know, the highest mountain in Colorado is Mount Albert with 14,439 feet. But he spent 14 years, hopefully this is correct, as very active mountain search and rescue team member. And if you want to have harrowing stories about what can happen in the mountains, feel free after the panel is over and after you have seen the maps to approach him. So this is for Wesley Brown. The next one is Donald McGurk. I have already shown where he sits. He is a former resident of Denver, hence a co-founder of the Rocky Mountain Map Society, and he's now in Kansas. I know for some die-hard Dallas Cowboys fans, Missouri. Kansas City, Missouri. Okay, so he moved, I guess, for family reasons in this direction. Okay, at least this is correct. And we have, I am working on material which was made available to me. So don't hit on the messenger. At least he is colonel, retired with the US Army, 25 years of service, and medical doctor. So this combination is not so uncommon. I will get to this a little bit later. He graduated of the US Army Command and General Staff College and later went then to the US Army War College. He's a co-founder, together with Wes, of the Rocky Mountain Map Society, an independent scholar and collector, and author on portolans. For the uninitiated, these are the old maps which show the outline of the coasts and the harbors, the settlements along the coast, and on early modern cartography. So his publications include, I will only name here, you can see the other two, both on the slide, because when you see him making this presentation on the Sea of the West, Mare of the West, you as American will definitely wonder where it is. And when you closely look on what you see on the top right of this slide, where British Columbia, Oregon, Washington is, some cartographers had a non-existent ocean or sea of the West. So when you want to get more information on that, it is digitally available. With that, we get then to our third panelist, Dennis Reinhardt. Born a Yankee, but thanks to proud German roots, quite likable. So here in Texas, we forgive him to be a Yankee. Te absolvo. He retired in 2008 after a 35-year career here at UTA, Professor Emeritus in History and in Russian. So this is a quite interesting combination, and ask him how it was getting students before the official fall of the wall into red territory. And I'm meaning communist red, not the American red. Extensive interest in and teaching of world history, East European history, historical methodology, and the history of cartography. So you see a very wide span. Professional service includes stints of being president of the Society for the History of Discovery, the Historical Society of New Mexico, and by the way, Santa Fe I like to call far West Texas, until a certain event in 1850, and of the Texas Map Society. Besides penning numerous scholarly articles, he authored books, including the Mapping the American Southwest and Mapping of Empire, Soldier Engineers of the Southwest. But I would like to draw your attention specifically to the fact that Dennis is the authority. Underline it 4 or 5 times on the life, times, and oeuvre of cartographer Hermann Moll. Everybody in the map scene is so conditioned when you drop the name Moll, everybody's looking around, is Dennis in the room? So he is really the one who knows everything about Hermann Moll. Also in his case, map donations have gone, amongst 2 other places, to the University of Texas Special Collections here. Last but not least, Gerald Saxon is sitting over there, native of Beaumont, so we have an original Texan, and I guess even the other ones, neither Wesley or Dennis would object that it's correctly, even nowadays, Texas, so Beaumont, Texas, and of course a proud Texan. No objections? Okay, fine. He retired only in 2024 after a service of 38 years here at UTA, and amongst the roles he played here, Director of Special Collections. So he saw everything what Virginia and Jenkins, Garrett and Dianne Powell were doing here at the library, for the library. He was Dean of the library, so your predecessor here, and he retired as an associate professor in history, and the emphasis is on American Southwest and studies, and he's a certified archivist. You see 3 of his publications. Currently, he is working on a project projects which include a biography of an impresario. So this is, let's call it an land or settlement developer, Sterling Clark Robertson, who in the 1830s settled more than 300 families here in Texas. And I still owe you the fun facts for Don, Dennis, and for Gerald. Don, when he graduated from the Army War College, he was told he was likely the first pediatrician to ever graduate from the Army War College Carlisle Barracks. And I don't know whether you are holding this record. I don't know either. Okay, so Don truly has broken barriers and went where no pediatrician has gone before. Dennis is still an active collector, but has now switched to map socks. I'm not asking, okay. Okay, so he has them on, and he is still learning Diné, that is the Navajo language. So watch out for the soon graduating young generation of code talkers. And finally, Gerald, he has possibly the most unlikely fun fact. Gerald is in his own words, frustrated rock musician. As a guitarist who seriously considered trying to make it in the music business 55 years ago. But he chickened out. We all know it's a hard life. You have to earn some money. He still records with former bandmates and other musicians now that digital technology has made recording easier. With this, I have introduced the panel, but before we get to the discussion of the panel, I would like to draw your attention to my predecessor. This is David Busseret. He is the gentleman on the bottom left of this slide, and he was the first holder of the Virginia and Jenkins Garrett Endowed Chair in the History of Cartography and Greater Southwestern Studies. You can imagine what problems I have to get this on a business card, this long title. And I asked him first, okay, would you consider coming here and joining in this tribute? David is by now 92 years old and he doesn't travel anymore. And he sent me a few lines, which I want to read now. And in the meantime, you can see terra cognita. So both the parents of Dianne were active in the Society for the History of Discoveries. The president is sitting over there.
Well, Alistair's still
Oh,
president.
the incoming president. So when Alistair, where are you? Over there. So we have the current president and the incoming president. And you see what changed in 20 years. It was paper print. Color was quite a sensation, and you could only use it sparingly. So let me read what David sent me. It is a great pleasure to contribute to this commemoration of the Garrett family. I first met Jenkins and Virginia and their daughters, Dianne and Donna, at the annual meetings of the Society for the History of Discoveries. I particularly remember the SHD meeting in Jamaica when the parents and I visited Port Royal under the blazing tropic sun. We are talking of 1990. Virginia's memory went back a long time and ranged widely. For instance, she well remembered the Fort Worth trials in the 1940s of the redoubtable B-29, a heavy bomber. She was a formidable collector of maps, and her remarkable collection eventually found its way to the University of Texas at Arlington Library. She also made a considerable contribution to the history of cartography by founding in 1995 the Virginia Garrett Lectures. They are still going strong and have led to the publication of books. Jenkins had an equally remarkable memory and was full of jokes. He particularly liked to tease me, and you have to remember for the next line, David at this stage was 60. And already for 20 years at the Newberry Library, he teased me about my stubbornly English accent, often inquiring of me, young man, when are you coming to Texas? Eventually, I did. So this is the relation of my predecessor with the Garrett family, and this has carried on then to the next generation. And before I get you to the panelists themselves, I would like to set the scene. Eventually, we have a map on the left-hand side, on both screens. On the left-hand side, you see arguably the most famous fictional map, the one in Robert Louis Stevenson's Treasure Island, published in 1883. Robert Louis Stevenson is the most famous offspring of a Scottish dynasty of lighthouse builders and chart makers. In 1883, he published the adventure novel Treasure Island, and with the best-loved fictitious map of the literary realm, recreating the style of a crude 18th century chart adorned with a cartouche, a compass rose, rugged shores of a lush tropical island, and a bright X for the hidden treasure, pirate treasure. But there is a twist to this iconic map, and this gets us to the point which I want to discuss with, or which I hope that the panel will discuss. In an 1894 journal article, along with the statement all the panelists will wholeheartedly agree with, I am told that there are people who do not care for maps, and I found it hard to believe. My translation is, there is life possible without maps, but it's not worthwhile living. This is my paraphrase of it. Stevenson recalls the creation of the novel, and there the map played an important role. And now I quote from what Stevenson wrote. I made the map of an island. It was elaborately and, I thought, beautifully colored. The shape of it took my fancy beyond expression. It contained harbors that pleased me like sonnets. As I paused upon my map of Treasure Island, the future characters of the book began to appear. Once the manuscript was ready, Stevenson sent it along with the chart that he deemed the chief part of my plot. So everything was created out of this map. He sent it to the publisher. And then the final lines are, again, I quote him, the proofs came, they were corrected, but I heard nothing of the map. I wrote and asked, was told it had never been received, and sat aghast. The map was drawn again in my father's office with embellishments, and my father himself brought into service a knack he had of various handwritings, elaborating forged the signature of Captain Flint and the sailing directions of Bill Bones. The ones who know Treasure Island know what it is. But now the crucial sentence. But somehow the book and the map were never Treasure Island to me again. So some people really live through and with maps. And I guess Dianne and her parents were among these people. So without further ado, I would invite the 4 panelists to come here to the front.
Emory, can I say a word? Yes. Do you remember Stanley Palmer, who was the head of the history department? Stanley used to make introductions that lasted about 15 minutes. And Emory, you are carrying on that tradition. So I want to thank you for that.
I can't conceal that I'm a native German. You like to do things sorry. But from now on, I hope that I only on occasion might jump in. I want to each of you to say initially a brief statement of how you yourself got into old maps, and of course how you get known of Dianne and the family. Your personal connection with maps and the relation with Dianne. Who wants to take it first?
Let's go.
No, let's go. Dennis, no, Dennis, you have the earliest. Yeah, you have the longest relationship.
Yeah.
The oldest, you pick on the oldest.
Yeah, right.
You have the longest relationship. Gerald, you go say.
Okay.
Well, perhaps it's appropriate because more? Come on, I used to teach 300 students without, remember, boss lady? We used to do that, you know? But anyway, it perhaps is appropriate. I was saying today to people that my interest literally began here, where we are, and it began with Jenkins in Virginia. Again, to cut it really short, I, at one point, purchased a map of Herman Mall's, and you weren't going to get away without hearing it from me, that I just found interesting and beautiful, and it was of the Caspian Sea. I might also point out it was cheap. I had that at home, had it hanging on the wall, and so on. And when, in fact, the donation was made here and the maps were brought in, I sort of became fascinated by all of the maps. And along with that, there were several books, one of which was a very brief book on Texas cartography, and I mean under 100 pages, like 70-something pages. And a quarter of that, a page in that book said, Herman Mall did absolutely nothing for Texas cartography. So I said to myself, why would you waste, in this brief a book, that much paper? And so I went then to the director of special collections, Bob Martin, who was here. And I said to him, Bob, do we have any mall maps? He said, oh, yes, we do. And we basically filled every flat surface out there with mall maps that came out of Virginia's collection. And I was just stunned, fascinated. And I understood the statement, and that is these two authors went into the mall maps because they were drawn in by just his ability as a cartographer, not by content. The content was, as they said, added nothing to Texas cartography. And years later, or not years later, but in the process, I began talking to Virginia about Herman Mall, and she said, I like him too. So she and I spent a good deal of time on occasion talking about Herman Mall's maps. And in the process, I realized I had one and didn't even know it because I bought it because it was the Caspian Sea and because I liked it. And so that's where it began here. And then through Bob Martin and his successor, J.C. Martin, As director of special collections, they sort of oriented me more and more toward maps. And that is, as they say, where the story began. And that's how I got involved. But if you pin me against the wall, I am still first and foremost a Russian historian.
I think we may pin you against the wall and make sure that's true. I first met the Garretts in 1986. I had applied for a job, and that is director of special collections here. And it was a 2.5-day interview. And I was thinking, my God, what did I do for 2.5 days? And part of that 2.5-day interview was to meet Jenkins and Virginia Garrett. And I did. We had dinner at the Fort Worth Club in downtown Fort Worth, and we talked about collections. Mr. Garrett admitted that he was bitten by the collecting bug, that it's something that he's had since he was at the University of Texas. And Mrs. Garrett said she was collecting maps at the same time as well. So I met them at that time, was hired here at UTA. I became an administrator in the library. So my dealings with the maps initially were to make sure they were well taken care of, cataloged, preserved, used in exhibits, etc. And UTA had started a map library before Mrs. Garrett ever donated her maps to UTA, and that was in 1976, and it was called the Cartographic History Library. She donated her maps in 1997, so it was a good 20 years before, and the Garretts were absolute generators in making that Cartographic History Library happen. Mr. and Mrs. Garrett went to the Sid Richardson Foundation to find money, the Brown and Lupton Foundation to get money, the UT system. Mr. Garrett had been on the Board of Regents for the UT system, and they wanted to buy the Edward Eberstadt map collection that had just been purchased by Johnny Jenkins, who was a very infamous, if you know collector, if you know book dealers in Texas, you would know that name. He was an infamous book dealer, but he ended up selling the Eberstadt maps to the Garretts and to UTA. And they actually had some money left over, and Mr. Garrett went back to the Sid Richardson Foundation and said, should I give you back the money? And they said, we're a foundation. We're not used to people wanting to give back money. We don't have a mechanism to do that. So what they said was go to Europe and buy some maps. And they took J.C. Martin to Europe, and they went through the Paris and Amsterdam and London purchasing maps with Sid Richardson Foundation money. And I was thinking, my God, I was just hired in 1986, and I used to tease Mr. Garrett, you never took me to Europe to buy maps. So that's how I met Mr. and Mrs. Garrett. And to me, they're almost always Mr. and Mrs. Garrett. It's very hard for me to say Jenkins and Virginia. And then I met Dianne a year later, Dianne, Donna, and Jinx. And the family, they have the same DNA. And we'll be talking about that as we go on. But that's how I met them.
I met the Virginia and Jenkins in 1995 when the Library of Congress created a support organization for the Map and Geography Division. And I'd love to tell you a little bit more about that later, but I won't use that in my few minutes right now. And they created a steering committee for that support organization of the Library of Congress. And the Jenkins and Virginia were on that steering committee, and I was honored to be on that steering committee. They were on that committee until 2008, so 13 years. And then a few years after that, Dianne came on the committee. And wow, she was really something. And so I got to serve with her on that committee for many years. We ended up planning various meetings that would occur in Texas together. You know what a great planner she was. And then it wasn't a treat for her, but it was a treat for me and my wife. As you know, some of you would know that near the end of her life, she had respiratory issues, and she was coming to Denver, which has a renowned hospital. National Jewish Hospital is a tremendous respiratory center, and she was coming to Denver regularly for special treatments. And I live about a mile from that hospital, and when she'd come, she'd be there for a couple days, and my wife and I and Dianne would get together over and over and over for dinner as a special treat for us. So those were my connections.
I first met Jenkins at a map meeting, I can't remember which one, at the British Library. And it was my first sortie into these meetings, my first overseas for sure. And I was just beginning to meet all these wonderful map people that were going to be at the meeting. And as we left for lunch, one of the participants who I barely knew said, "Hey, we're all going out for lunch. You want to join us?" And I said, "Oh, fantastic. Yeah, I'd love to." So I get there, and it was a heavy hitter. Even Mick Tooley was there. And it was just wonderful. I got to sit next to him. We had a lot of good conversations. Then someone told me that Jenkins was picking up the tab. Well, the person that invited me hadn't said anything about that, and I felt awful. So I went up and whispered in his ear, "Please let me pay for the tip." And he said, "Okay." So I felt really good about that. I think he felt good about it too. I first met Virginia, and Dennis reminded me of this, at a Vancouver map meeting many years later. And I was there for a map meeting, but it was also the first trip I ever took with my current wife. Where are you? Raise your hand. Show everyone who you are. And so we were all going to go to the dinner. And it was quite a ways from where we were talking. And so the amount of transportation there was limited. So into the car was myself and Di, the Garretts, Dennis Reinhardt, and my friend Greg McIntosh. Now, it was a good-sized car, but it wasn't that big, so you can imagine what we all looked like. And I had to get over to the very left lane in about a 5-lane highway or what major road, and I just couldn't get there. Well, in Vancouver, if you don't get all the way over to the left and you're on the bridge, it's about 1.5 miles long. And so we're going over the bridge, and would you believe Dennis was giving me a hard time? I mean, he was merciless. You're thinking of, don't think about marrying this guy. I mean, he's, look at what, he's a, I won't use the words, but, and my friend Greg
I was going to defend him by saying it was raining that night.
Well, it was raining that night, that's true. And Greg as well was, and so I was very embarrassed, but eventually she did marry me, and that's when I had a third meeting with them. And it was about a year later, and I had said she'd marry me. She made me chase her until she let me catch her. And my mom had died, and my dad was in an Alzheimer's clinic. So I called Virginia, and I said, you know, I'm going to marry this young lady, and I have no mother or, you know, dad or mom to bring her home to. And Virginia said, come on down. And so we went down and spent a wonderful day with both of them. He took me to the wrong side of the tracks where he grew up. He showed me his dad's church. And that evening, we went out to eat down at the, where the cattle is. Stockyards, thank you very much, Stockyards. And so we're walking, and it's a beautiful night, and we're just walking down, and I'm with Virginia, and Di, as always, is about 20 yards ahead of me because she walks a lot faster than I do, and Jenkins was with her. And so Virginia and I just were talking, and suddenly there was a ruckus in front of us. And Jenkins and Di had found, or were passing a restaurant that had live music. And the ruckus was they were dancing. And so I turned to Virginia and said, well, I guess she's got his vote. And she smiled at me and said, you have mine as well. So those were good times, and I really love them very much. What else am I supposed to talk about? Sorry, I got too deep into it.
Mr. Garrett was dancing.
Yes.
That brings up a story that Mr. Garrett told me one time. He was a Baptist minister's child. Some of you probably know that. His dad was the minister of Rosen Heights Baptist Church in North Fort Worth, which is very much a working class neighborhood. And when he went down to the University of Texas at Austin, he said that he had never danced before. He had an older sister who beat him down to the University of Texas at Austin, and there were dances there. And as a preacher's kid, he was really nervous. He didn't want to dance because it might embarrass his parents, but his sister convinced him that she could teach him, he could dance, and he said, "Gerald, I became a dancing Baptist." I said, "Oh, Mr. Garrett, really, how did that go?" And he said, "It really went well. I went back to Fort Worth. I told my dad that I danced in Austin, and he said, 'Jenkins, don't worry about it. Your faith has nothing to do with whether you dance or not.'" But he also said that he would never dance in Fort Worth because he didn't want the congregation to find out that he was a dancer. So he actually danced in Fort Worth. Shame on him.
I forgot to mention, so I met Dianne at one of the multiple MAP meetings. I can't remember exactly which one. And we'll talk about further information down the road.
Since already the Phillips Society came up, and both Don and Wes, you both worked with Dianne on that. Since this is a little bit further afield here from Texas, could you possibly, I ask first Wes a little bit about the background in how you worked together with Dianne in Washington on cartographic record?
I'm happy to, and I want to speak to those boys over there. So you two pay attention. The Library of Congress has 5.5 million maps. It is by far the greatest collection in the world, and certainly in the United States, it's the most prestigious map collection by far. And in 1995, when the chief, who is a renowned, beloved expert, Ralph Ehrenberg, decided to put together a steering committee, a board of directors for the Map and Geography Division, he chose your great-grandparents, Virginia and Jenkins. And the story was told to me by Ralph that when he went to Chicago to meet with the great map dealer Kenneth Nebenzahl, to say, who should I pick from around the country to represent the different parts of the country? And Nebenzahl said, well, go with Jenkins Garrett. Well, he did a little investigation and realized Jenkins wasn't the guy he wanted. It was Virginia that was the one that he wanted. So those two then, our committee met every 6 months, and you can imagine what a pleasure it was. I got to go to Washington every 6 months for 22 years to be part of this wonderful committee. And your great-grandparents, and then later your grandmother, would get shown the treasures. So we'd show up, and the first thing they always did was say, oh, let's take you, and it was a group of about 10 or 12 of us, we're going to take you in the vault and we're going to show you the greatest treasures. And I mean, these treasures were, like this is the map we just found that George Washington wrote of his, of his estate, or things, just incredible stuff. So they were very honored to be part of this organization. And it was Ralph Ehrenberg's vision that this great map collection would be put forth out into the nation. And these ambassadors, first Jenkins and Virginia, and then Dianne, would be the ambassadors to their region. And so that was their role. And I think that sets the background. I will just say a little bit more. When the elder Garretts couldn't continue, and they left in 2011 or in 2008, and then Ralph Ehrenberg decided he met a woman named Dianne, and I want to tell you a little. I called him in preparation and got to talk to Ralph Ehrenberg, and there's a quote or two that I'm really enjoying, and I want to relate to you. So, Ralph Ehrenberg is this tremendous scholar And one of the things he's an expert in is the Lewis and Clark expedition and Western expeditions. And he and a colleague, Herman Viola, who was the head of Native American history at the Smithsonian Institute, so not, someone of distinguished background as well. The two of them would lead this trip, and they did it for several years where they would follow the Lewis and Clark Trail, and I see some family members shaking their head because they're familiar with this extraordinary trip, and on the trip was included an 80-mile horse trek where they were on horses for 80 miles. And this is, so Dianne came along, and she and a girlfriend came on this trip and through the Bitterroot Mountains. And first of all, Ralph said that she was an excellent horsewoman. And that was his opinion. And then I'm going to read you the quote. And he said, so we were all looking in the morning, we'd be ruffled up and, all dirty and everything like that. And he said, quote, when Dianne came out of the tent, she looked glamorous like a woman in a New York glamour magazine. So this is the Dianne we all know, I think. That's right. Anyhow, that cracked me up to hear that. And then apparently Donna's sister worked as a cartographic assistant for one summer at the Library of Congress, to just get that on the record. She worked with the non-cataloged Texas maps and created essentially a written record of that collection. So your family has very much contributed, not only in Texas, but back in Washington, D.C., to the national collection.
And you all can contribute to cataloging maps at the Library of Congress, because up to 1966, all the maps they got only into a ledger, but not properly catalogued. So there are still huge backlogs, and once they become to know you, you are invited, okay, come back to our 4 football fields of map drawers we have. You can pull all of them. If you find anything great, write about this, and we will catalog it. So I challenge all of you, if you have spare time, specifically the retirees, spend 2 or 3 years and you can do magnificent finds up there. Of this backlog, still of the maps acquired up to 1966, still more than half of them are not in the catalog.
I'd just like to add, first, those meetings were fantastic, and I'm going to talk about them a little later, but he mentioned seeing all these wonderful books and maps, and I was on one of those walkthroughs, I can't remember which year, and as we were walking through, there was some shelves, and on top of the shelves were 3 books. They all looked about the same, just lying on top, and one of the librarians was there, and I said, what are those books? And they said, oh, those are our Gutenberg Bibles. 3 of them sit out on the shelf.
With regard to the Phillips Society, I might say when it was founded, I was strongly encouraged by Jenkins to join. And I said no, and the encouragement went on. I said, I'm a humble professor. I can't join every organization. Well, finally, the encouraged bullying worked. And I joined. And when Jenkins finally gave up the leadership, Jenkins, Virginia gave up the leadership, I said, now is my time. I can quietly drop out. And I heard this voice from Dianne saying, oh, no, you can't.
I'll say one thing too, because Wes said that Ralph Ehrenberg was going to approach Mr. Garrett, but found out it really wasn't Mr. Garrett who was collecting maps, it was Mrs. Garrett. And if you know anything about Mr. Garrett, is he built a very strong Texana collection in the 60s and 70s and donated it to UTA. But he always said he didn't collect maps, at least not at that time, because he didn't know enough about the maps. And it was Mrs. Garrett who, in her defense, she tried to go to bookstores around the world. Literally, while he was looking for Texana items, she would look at maps. And she got interested and bitten by the bug of maps, too. And Mr. Garrett always said that he was her first assistant when it came to maps. She made the decisions, but once she made the decisions, he was always willing to support the maps. So I can understand why Ralph would say that, because it was she and not him who collected maps.
Question to both Dennis and to you, Gerald, since you mentioned that the collecting bug was in Virginia, Garrett. Could you elaborate a little bit? What does it take to form not only by numbers a big collection, but also by value, not in the monetary sense, but in the collecting value that it makes a sensible collection? I guess each great collector also needs great advice from coming in. Can you, Dennis and Gerald, elaborate a little bit on that? What first the parents and later Dianne, what the sources of advice on making the collecting the decisions were?
You want to go first? Okay. I think the bottom line, Emory, is
He's a more recent retiree, so he can go first.
you have to have a plan in place, and you have to know what you're planning to collect. And Mrs. Garrett said at the very beginning, she really was just looking for maps that would complement Mr. Garrett's Texana collection. So she was looking for maps that showed Texas as a political entity. But then the more she learned about maps, the more she went into the SHD meetings and other meetings, she decided that she needed to broaden her collection. And if you only collected Texas as a political entity, you can't go back that far. So she began to broaden her perspective to the Gulf of Mexico. She also broadened her perspective to the land that became Texas. And then later, I think through Dennis's input, she broadened the perspective to include key cartographers whose maps reflect these things. And so from my perspective, Mrs. Garrett's collection policy and agenda evolved over time. And I think a lot of it had to do with people like Dennis and Wes and Don.
Gerald, did she also collect geography texts?
She did collect geographies and atlases too.
At one point, when talking to Virginia, as we did often about her collection, I said, you know, now that we're teaching the history of cartography here at the university, there are things we need to add to the collection so we can, fully teach the history of cartography and historical geography. And I said, the simplest way I can look at this is we sell all this Texas stuff, and we buy world. Well, after she clutched her pearls on that one, I said, no, I'm kidding. I said, you have actually caught the collecting bug in big time, because one of the things that Gerald doesn't mention, you have to have this plan, but the second thing is you have to stick to it. And that never happens. It always gets away from you. In fact, you're not a decent collector if you don't let it get away from you. And it did for Virginia. But if you look at, first of all, Virginia and Jenkins's collecting complemented each other. And Jenkins used to say one of the good things about that was you never got your spouse saying, what are you buying that for? Because she would buy maps, he would buy Texana. And so they'd help each other. But secondly, if you look at what she did, she started, as Gerald said, with basically the entity of Texas. But then eventually any part of any map that showed the land that would become Texas. And if you see that, she first started fairly politically oriented, that is Texas, then regionally oriented, and eventually it became global. And by the time I was kidding her about, getting rid of the Texas stuff, we'd already escaped that. And we're into a lot of other things. And she was always really, really good about that. And a couple of months after that, Dianne came up to me at one point and she said, did you really tell my mother we ought to sell all the Texas stuff? And I said, yeah. And she said, why? And I said, because we could get a good price. And then she just snapped right in. She said, makes sense.
Emery, let me say one thing about collecting. And I shamelessly brought a book that Tom Krenick and I did about 15 years ago called Collecting Texas. Not the world, but Texas, Dennis. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, you think there's the world, I mean.
And these people get bitten. I mentioned bitten by the bug. And literally, Mr. Garrett and Mrs. Garrett became compulsive. I'm not sure Dianne ever got to the compulsive level, but maybe she was getting close. That's a possibility. But those of you who know Texas material may know the name Vandell. And he was a famous Texas collector. And the nice thing about Jenkins and Virginia and Dianne is they're a unit. They were a team. And certainly Mr. and Mrs. Garrett were a team. But not all collectors have spouses who are teammates. And let me just read something real quick about Earl Vandell, who was probably the most important Texana collector in the first half of the 20th century, other than Thomas W. Streeter, and many of you who know that name. But here's what happened. Vandell was a landman. He was a petroleum landman in Texas. He worked for the Magnolia Petroleum Company. It was in the early 1900s, but it's 1940 now, and he's going to a San Marcos resident of a book dealer whose name is Dudley Dobie. Not J. Frank Dobie, but Dudley Dobie, his nephew. Here, let me read this. It was December, and it was about 30 degrees outside. He said, time meant nothing when we're talking about Vandell. Let's see. Time meant nothing for Vandell as he pursued his Texana. On a frigid, this is January 1940, he roused Dudley Dobie from a night's sleep. It was midnight. He banged on his door. He said on the front door of his San Marcos home, he threw a bathrobe on. He stumbled to the front door, went to the door, and he said, "Dudley, you got any good books for sale?" And so Dudley got up. He knew that Vandell was quite a collector. He said Vandell had a charming characteristic, and that is he paid cash every time he bought books. He said, so for the next 3 hours, Dudley shuffled stock from the back of the house to the front. Vandell began making decisions and selections, and then ended up with 3 bags of Texas material. And he said, Dudley, let me help you carry that to the car. And so again, it's 30 degrees. Now it's about 3:30 in the morning. He said, out the front door they went, down the sidewalk they went, Dudley noticing the crispness of the night. He guessed the thermometer hovered around 30 degrees. And when they reached the car parked at the curb, Vandell used his free hand to open the door. As he did, a lone figure covered in a bath was in the car. He said, Dudley, let me introduce you to my wife. He said, my God, Earl, she's been here for 3.5 hours. He said, oh, she doesn't mind. She's used to it. So you talk about collectors. That's how collectors are. That's great.
That's great.
Okay. Since we have reached the point of collecting, may I ask all of you, at what point and for what reason did you think about donating part of your collection to an institution like the University of Texas at Arlington? You all collected, and you all at some point made the executive decision, some parts of my collection should come to Arlington, and you made it also for some other institutions. So what made you think, okay, it's good with an institution and not like a Yankee would say, sell it off?
Well, I've done several things with my collection. My first collection was early world maps. And I was just a pediatrician, so I would buy one and take a year to pay it off and then pick out another one. Interesting though, early world maps just got outrageous very, very quickly. There was a certain Buck Shirley's book of world maps, and just got outrageous. So at some point, you can't afford your collection anymore. You can't afford to buy what you did buy. So I was beginning to get interested in this Sea of the West thing. And so what I did was I had to make a decision. Do you take these wonderful maps and put them in a bank for 30 years, 40 years, and then sell them then, and then be worth even more money? And I just couldn't do it. My maps were like my little children almost, you know. You didn't want to lock them up. You wanted them out. So I sold. But what you can do, and what you should do, as you collect, you know what other libraries have and what they don't have, because you've done the research. You've gotten that far into it that you know, Osher Library doesn't have that one. So if I want to get more information, I'll call down to Arlington. And with that sort of knowledge, then when you go to sell, and I've just recently sold or given away a lot of things to this institution, or the Osher Library and the Denver Public Library, you know what they want and what they don't want, what they have and what they don't have. So that's part of it. Knowing, number one, you know enough about it that you've been doing so long that you know where it should go.
Well, for me, the answer again is simple. We're here. And that is, this is where I started. This is where Judy and I first met the Garretts, met Dianne, met the rest of the family. This is where we were inspired. I taught here in that room. It was my classroom for many years in there. And in our conversations, the Garretts and Judy and I always talked about what to do with maps and where they would do the most good. And being present sort of at creation here, I saw the growth and how much good it could do for our students, fellow faculty members, etc. So there's never a question that what we amassed would come here. And we've already donated about 2/3 of what we have. And I reluctantly hold on to the other third under the guise of still writing one more book. It is hard to part. And that original Caspian Sea map I still have. It is still on my wall in my study. I see it every day when I go in there to work. And it reminds me of my two worlds, and that is history, cartography, and Russia. So for me, there is not a question of where it's going or why it would go here. It's just when. So for me, the decision is easy. And I might say no reflection on my fellow collectors. I've never sold a map. I've bought them, traded for them, finagled them from people. But we've always looked at donating them. And maybe that's because my wife and I are university people and spent 35 years here. So we came to appreciate that and saw what students are doing with it. There are several of my students here in this room. And that just reinforces, what I feel about where they should go.
I would say ditto to that. The reason that we're here is to celebrate maps and historical materials. I'm the outlier here. I was not a map collector, but my wife and I decided to make a small endowment here in special collections so that maps can be maintained. And so not just maps, but historical materials in all formats. So there's a Gerald and Janice endowment in special collections that we've added to every year. Not maps, but money, which can be just as good as maps.
There's nothing wrong with selling maps, and I've sold plenty of them, but it's not as fun as giving them away. And that's the difference. And the key, I think, is to survey the landscape and think about what institution or place would be the best home. And in my case, it's for that individual item rather than the collective whole. And so in my case, I have already given maps to half dozen institutions, and it's fun.
Let me say one other thing, too. The Garretts never had any doubt in their minds what they were doing. They were collecting, but they were collecting for a purpose. And I mean Dianne, Jenkins, and Virginia. They were collecting for a purpose, and that purpose was to build a research collection here at UTA. They loved the hunt. They loved collecting. They loved interacting with people. But the thing that gave them the most joy was when people came and used their collection, whether they were teaching from it, researching in it, or whatever it was. That is exactly what the Garretts wanted. And Mr. Garrett and Mrs. Garrett and Dianne have said that over and over and over again. That gives them the greatest pleasures to make sure their maps, not just maps, but everything else that they've donated, those things are being used.
Yeah, they intended this collection when it started to grow by donation by others, and it has grown. A number of important collections have been donated. There'll be some people here tomorrow at the Map Society, like David Finfrock, who just recently gave his collection of maps here. And that was always the intent. And Dianne inherited the legacy of that intent. She never wavered from that's the way it should go. Gerald, though, when I was asked to do an article for a journal on Virginia, an article that was supposed to be part of a collection on women map collectors. And I told the editor, I said, I only know of 2 women map collectors. I said, one was Virginia Garrett, and the other is this woman in Britain, Carolyn Batchelor. I said, I don't know anymore. She said, oh, there are plenty more. Well, that journal never came to be, though 2 individual articles were published, one on Carolyn and mine on Virginia. And Gerald was helping me with the article on Virginia, and he let me know this quip. He told me about this quip from Dianne, that when the Garretts made their donations here, Diane's first remark was, they're giving my inheritance away. And, it was typical Dianne. We've laughed over that for a long time. But there was always an understanding in the Garrett family, and that is that what would go to whom and what would go here and so on. And again, collectors, and I've known a number of them, for example, up at Newberry, 2 major collections that went to Newberry, it was always clear that the maps would go to a place where they could be fully appreciated and used, and thereby were not part of an inheritance to anyone. And again, collectors tend to do that because they don't just collect to satisfy themselves, but ultimately, like Jenkins, Virginia, and Dianne, it's to have it go on and help people, to develop interests and so on. As a historian, I was always happy to see students in our classes come over here and look, even just for the odd map, not having anything to do with the history of cartography, just because they needed a map to see what they could find out about a certain time period and so on.
I was just going to ask Gerald and Dennis to talk about Kit Goodwin's role in the map collection and her relationship with the Garretts. I think we need to mention that.
Well, I can start. Kit Goodwin worked here, but she was also my master's student. And I was reminded today of one of my famous quotes in class, and that is, women don't know how to fold maps. And that comes from Kit directly.
I move it over.
Yeah. When Brenda was in my class, she had gotten the word about my remarks, so she had learned how to fold maps. But in any case, what happened is I put out road maps in the first class on the table just to discuss what a map is. And students, what you would expect before we start class, they'd open them up and so on and lay them out. And I said, no. I said, this is not what we're here for. To start really a scientific study of maps, you study them in situ. So I said, let's put them back the way they were. Well, Kit Goodwin could not refold the map. And she became my whipping child on women can't refold maps. But anyway, Kit worked here, and she came to know the collection as better or as best or better as anyone, certainly better than I did. And when I taught here in the night classes I had here, Kit was always here with me because they didn't trust me. So I had to have someone from the library here. But no, Kit was always here. And, we would talk before class about what I was going to do that night and how we were going to do it. And then I would ask, do you know of anything I don't know of or I'm not familiar with, that might help what I want to get to? And she sometimes did and sometimes did not. And eventually, she and I actually collaborated on a book for Stanley Marcus, celebrating the Columbus anniversary in 1992. And you may not know, but Stanley Marcus was a devotee of miniature books. And so what we did for the Columbus anniversary, we took one of our maps, the Waldseemüller map, which is the first one to really identify America as America. And we reproduced it full size. And then it got folded down into a miniature book about that large. And there were 110 regular copies and I think 10 very special editions. And those 10 went to Marcus, me, Kit, the publisher, and one or two others. And we all met over at Stanley's place, Mr. Stanley's place, and we all signed the special ones. And, Kit said at one point to me, she said, I don't know if I should be here. I said, why not? I said, you did as much as anybody else did, more, I said, than some. And she was always, very humble about stuff like that. And she eventually, her master's was in fact developed out of our collection. Our current head of the Geography and Map Division at the Library of Congress was one of my grad students. And she did her PhD here. And she did very much what Kit did for Texas maps, only she did it based on our French maps, that is, the maps of French origin here. And she did a cartobibliography. So she came to know parts of the collection that I was not all that totally familiar with either. So, I thank Kit for being my tried and true partner through a lot of this stuff. And, I know she did even more with Gerald.
Actually, Kit was the predecessor of Ben. So she was the cartographic archivist here in Special Collections.
Were really hard to fill because she was a wonderful organizer when it came to, especially for events.
Right.
She had college.
Didn't she work for the Garretts?
She did work for the Garretts first. That is correct. As a matter of fact, I first met Kit when I was taking the archives classes here at UTA. Steffi, you probably don't even know I took the archives classes here at UTA, but I did. And Kit was in that class. And so she and I were together in that class. And this was in the early 1980s, long before I was hired here at UTA. And Kit was both the exhibits curator once she was hired at UTA and the cartographic archivist. So you talk about somebody who had a great deal of energy. It is. Then again, you never know. And my wife used to say, well, Kit is your university wife, because she and I went just literally everywhere together. And we dealt with the Garretts together. She did a great bibliography of the U.S.-Mexican War with Mr. Garrett, published in 1995 by the University of Texas Press. And it's all the Mexican War materials that are here in special collections. Well, I said all as of 1995 that were here in special collections. So she not only dealt with maps, but she dealt with other historical materials.
I mean, if somebody would take the time just looking at that stuff, Gerald mentioned that the book, look at her master's dissertation or master's thesis, and then look at the other one I mentioned on French maps. And you have then, with those three sources, a really good way to get into a lot of what we have here.
One thing I wanted to say about Dianne that is, I think, different. And the thought crossed my mind when we were talking about giving away maps as collectors. The main reason we give away maps is because no kids ever want them because they're sick of what their parents have been devoted to. And I think it is indeed a fact that the more passionate the parent is about a subject, the more the child wants to not be involved in it. And therefore, we must be surprised at Dianne because her parents were rabid, both of them. I mean, think of that. Both of them were rabid collectors. And yet in this, I think, unusual case, Dianne took the mantle up and not only was a collector, but actually served at a very distinguished level, many organizations in the field, every bit as much as her parents.
We're hoping
Now-
for another generation
Anyhow.
to take it up as well.
You may want, I'm not sure if you have any more questions. It's this poor audience.
Question to the panel soon, but I want to stress one point. What is also exceptional about the parents and of the support Dianne later gave, we have many collectors who collect, might it be maps, might it be baseball cards, might it be guitars of rock stars. You can collect everything. And at one point, a Yankee would sell it off, others would give it away to a collection. But even in the field of collecting maps, giving it to a collection is normally the final step. Virginia and Jenkins Garrett, and this was already mentioned earlier, made or had the vision. Okay, we collect books and we collect maps, but what happens to these books and maps after we donate it to the University of Texas at Arlington? So obviously, there needs to be a special collection. But, and this is unique, you don't have it at another place in the United States, and you don't have it outside the United States, that the ones who gave the collection or the founding part of the collection and giving or soliciting money to have then somebody like David Grisseray, and I'm now walking in his shoes, as an endowed chair, as a person who is hired to work with the maps, to teach classes, to write scientifically about this. This is unique about this place. This is a vision no other map collector here in the United States had, and not only having the vision, but fulfilled it. And in this vein, my last question to the panel.
Wait, can I add to that? I'm sorry. That's right, I'm sorry. But you're right. Their donations have been transformative to the university, not just to the library, not just to special collections, but to the university, including the history department, which is now the Department of History and Geography. I don't think that would have happened if the Garretts hadn't been involved. We have the Center for Greater Southwestern Studies. I don't think that would exist if the Garretts weren't involved. We have Emory Demhardt's endowed chair. Of course, it's not called the Emory Demhardt Endowed Chair, but it's the Garrett Endowed Chair, and that would not have happened if they weren't involved. They also insisted that we raise $1 million endowment to help underwrite the collection and help support the collection. And I know that because I raised that $1 million endowment, and it took a long time. But they wanted to make sure that too often people make donations and then universities have short memories. And once they're gone, it's like, we don't remember making these agreements. Well, Mr. Garrett was an attorney, so we have very specific guidelines on what needs to happen. And I think the Garretts were very bright in making sure these agreements are going to be followed.
Tonight is not the night for it, but you might ask Gerald sometime the long and twisted story of Jenkins Garrett trying to give his barbed wire collection to special collections. And how Gerald squirmed to not have to take it on. I mean, I was there at many of the sessions, and this man deserves a lot of credit because there were reels of the stuff, etc. Oh,
in his garage.
In his garage.
Okay, so the last question to the panel. You were all, three of you are collectors, one an administrator of maps. So for the final question to the panel, looking forward, so looking to the future, what would be your advice in going forward with an institutional collection? How would you as a collector, speaking for your group, what should be the relation? How should an institution like the University of Texas, what would you expect from them as a collector, or as in the case of Gerald, as a former administrator? What do you see as advice how to go forward? So I'm basically asking for words of wisdom from the old white man. All three of four.
Go ahead. You're an old man.
All right. I'll start. Ralph Ehrenberg would say at the Library of Congress, and I've never forgotten it, you build a great institutional collection through contemporary collecting. Think about that. He meant you build a great institutional collection years from now by being very aggressive at the time of what is being made at that time when everyone else is overlooking that. For example, he went after aeronautical maps for decades and now has a collection of over 2,000 different aeronautical maps, which he's giving to the Library of Congress. And I've seen that over and over with institutions, that there are things going on right now that can be collected by going out and getting free sources, getting people energized about the collection. And that really just takes the curators and the administrators in the institution to just have the vision and the energy to make that happen. It doesn't take much money.
I think I would definitely agree with that. That it's very important to, now that the collection's here, is to continue to develop it, but also to promote it. And that was, we've mentioned it several times, that was so important to the Garretts to make sure their collection is being used. They do that through the biennial Virginia Garrett Lecture Series. They do it by having other people come and donate materials. They do it by exhibits, like the exhibit with Dianne today. They do it by starting the Texas Map Society that started in this room several years ago with Mr. and Mrs. Garrett and others from UTA and around the state talking about it. So it's important to kind of engender that kind of excitement about maps, historical materials, because in the final analysis, a place like Special Collections is essentially a laboratory where we come and ask questions, we look at the past, we look at documents, and then we evaluate them and we render decisions and conclusions based on them. You remember when fact used to be important in this country? So we still focus on facts in Special Collections.
Yeah, I'm coming from the inside. I would say I would like to see this institution, this community, this university community, realize what the world realizes about this collection. And that is, this collection is known far better around the world than it is here on campus. And there, we could go into all the reasons for that. But I think that would be my desire. And again, that doesn't take a lot of money. It takes pointing out to people on campus what you've got and really what a bargain it is. First of all, for maintenance, and second of all, what it costs. We could have many engineering buildings donated here, and we could actually get a new library, a new special collection. But the collection will grow. Yeah. But the collection will grow anyway because there is this momentum. So I'd like to see that continue. But I would like to see on campus. Well, for example, when we founded the geography area, I was mentioning that today. Lots of people came together on that. We had an academic vice president at that time, Bill Baker, and I sort of started the ball rolling. Geology department saw possibilities in it, so they came over and started to help us. The dean of science, who usually didn't come out of his lair for much, got on board for it. We didn't know what we were doing, so we contacted the National Geographic Society, and they sent people down to look at us here and to help us. They gave us money to help us get started. Not a lot, but some. And that's what we need on campus, I think, is this bringing more people into the area of special collections and realizing it. I'm not only talking about the maps. I mean, we've got a Texas labor collection. We've got a political collection here. We've got all kinds of stuff here that's really incredible, and it's better known off campus than on. And that's always bugged me.
I would say that before you can give a collection away, you have to make a collection. So let me just make a few statements. Number one, never buy a map expecting that it's going to be worth more money, because that's not the case. It may be, but that's not the case. Number two, start a collection that you can afford. And it's even better if you start a collection that you can afford and no one else is collecting. Believe it or not, after 5 or 10 years, you will be the world expert on that. And then some institution is going to want that. And again, so Wes sort of suggested that. You never know what's going to be important, but if you love that particular subject and you can afford it and you've got some time to spend, at the end of 10 years, you're going to have a wonderful collection and some institution's going to want it.
Emery, I want to say one last thing, and I think it kind of summarizes all of the Garretts, Mr. and Mrs. Garrett and Dianne. One time, Mr. Garrett asked me, he never called me Gerald, Saxon. Saxon, what church do you go to? I said, well, Mr. Garrett, we're Methodist. And he looked at me, and his father was a Baptist hellfire and brimstone minister. He said, well, Saxon, that's religion in its most diluted form. And I said, well, thanks a lot. But what I want to say is John Wesley, in letters that John Wesley wrote in the mid-1700s, to me summarizes all of the Garretts, Mr. and Mrs. Garrett, and of course, and Dianne. And John Wesley was the founder of Methodism. But here's his quotes. If you're Methodist, you may know this quote. If you're not, you may still know it. It's this. And this is what the Garretts did, all of them. It says, do all you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, for as long as you can. And that's exactly what the Garretts have done. And it's been a privilege to know them and work with them. And it's hard to believe those three are gone, and we're looking at the next generation.
My closing image of Dianne is that when we were down in San Antonio at one point for a meeting, and I don't quite know how it happened, but J.C. Martin and Dianne and I ended up on one of the barges going through the canals. And Dianne asked some question about Texas cartography. And the three of us started talking about it. And we must have made 4 circuits of that canal and didn't even know it, just because we were so deeply involved in it. And when one of us fell by the wayside, the other prodded. But Dianne was a complete player in there, and she was probably taking healthy notes, from the rest of us on it. But I will always remember that. It was a beautiful evening in San Antonio, and we were having a lot of fun doing things that we liked. So that's how I remember her, and what she did for us here.
Okay, we are coming now to the close of the official part of the evening. The last official function will be a champagne toast to Dianne. I was told to ask who is not wanting alcoholic beverage, they will get non-alcoholic. So, okay, just make yourself known. All the ones who don't object will get alcohol. And once we had the toast to Dianne, then
Yeah, non-alcoholic.
Yeah, I was going to say, that seems more fun.
will be over. You are invited to see over there. The open door, there is
Non-alcoholic. Is that non? What about you, Wes? Oh, he wants the regular stuff. He wants the hard stuff.
In the first 2 rooms, you see displayed of maps donated by other collectors.
You're not, right?
No, I'm
If you
joking.
go to the big room with the big table, there are also the Martin Waldseemüller replica is on the wall. All the maps you see there on the wall and on display are by Dianne. So you are cordially invited informally to continue with conversations. Thank you. We are just waiting that everybody gets something.
Right.
Okay, has everybody something with or without alcohol? Okay, so to the memory of Dianne and her parents, and that their deeds will have a long-lasting positive impact.
Here.
And I guess we all thank our 4 panelists for sharing their knowledge. It has been recorded so future generations, if they still go to old-fashioned video and audio tapes, if they don't only wait for or look for AI, they can follow it. Okay, now it's everybody on his or her own.
Had to be divided in about
Right.
100 different.